Alright, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk about multiplying radicals together. Some things you need to know before I begin. The only way you can multiply radicals together is if they are of the same index, meaning each radical has the same index number. A square root can multiply to a square root, a cubic can multiply to a cubic, or a cube root, excuse me, can multiply to a cube root, but you can't do a, you cannot, not. You cannot multiply the square root and a cube root together. So, how is this going to happen? Well, unfortunately, for those of you who weren't at school today, you don't have the worksheet. These are all in your worksheet, so go ahead and copy them down into your notes, and then you can transfer this information to the homework sheet. So, there are two ways to approach these problems. You can either multiply them together first and then make your factor trees, or you can make your factor trees and put everything, match everything up and get your answer that way. But in the case of this problem, when I look at a 12 and I look at a 3, I automatically know that that's 36, and I recognize the fact that the square root of 36 is just 6, because that's a perfect square. So in that one, it was best to go ahead and multiply them together and then just take the square root. Versus the square root of 6 times the square root of 10, if I multiply them together, I get the square root of 60. So that's not a perfect square. So I'm going to go ahead and write here, and I'm going to do my factor trees. So that's 2 and 3 and 2 and 5. Since we are looking at square roots, so our index number is a 2, I will be grouping in groups of 2. So these two 2's can go together. What does that mean for us? Well, if you remember from yesterday and the day before, that means that one 2 comes out, the other 2 meets its demise, and then what's left inside is whatever didn't have a partner to go out with. I couldn't group. So this 3 couldn't group with anybody, the 5 couldn't group with anyone, so we end up with a 3 and a 5 right here. And what does that mean our answer is? Well, our answer then is 2 square roots of 15. On this problem, if you have the same index numbers, once again, those same index numbers, so in this case we are looking at a square, which means I have to have 2 of the same thing, and since I have a 12 here and a 12 here, I automatically know that my answer is just 12. Now, how do we know that? Well, 12 times 12 happens to be 144, and based on elementary school and having memorized our multiplication tables, we know that that's a perfect square, so it's 12. Now, this fourth root problem is much more difficult. I could take this 12 here and I can multiply it to the 192, but I get an even bigger number than I'm already dealing with. So let's go ahead and factor tree the 12. So that's going to be a 2 and a 6 and 2 and 3. And let's go ahead and do 192, which is 2 and 96, and that's 3 and 32. And as we've done 32, what feels like 1,000 times already in the last 2 days. Okay. So now, because my index number on both of them happens to be a 4, it means I'm grouping by 4s. So I have 4 2's right here. There's group 1. And I have 4 2's right here, which is group 2. So group 1 is going to pull out a 2. Group 2 will give me a 2. And remember, everybody else has to perish. And then I have the fourth root of what was left. There was a 3 and a 3. And if you remember from the other day, that we multiply the numbers together then, and we get 4 fourth root of 9 as our multiplication simplified. Alright, so now I have the cube root of 5 and the cube root of 4. Well, neither one of those, if I do my factor trees on, are going to give me any numbers that I can group up. So this just ends up being the cube root of 20. Now over here on the 16, on the other hand, that's 2 and 8, and we know that to be 2 and 4, and we knew that to be 2 and 2. Or we could go the route of 4 and 4, and 2 and 2, and 2 and 2. And if we do all that, we are grouping by 3's this time, since my index number is a 3. I'm going to group by 3's. So I have 3 here, I have 3 here, and I have those guys left over. So I'm going to pull out a 2 from the group 1, a 2 from group 2, so that means I have 4 cube root, and what's left? Well, I have that 2 and that 2, so that's 4. So 4 cube root of 4. All right. So now I have a number on the outside, right here, a number on the outside. Well, a number on the outside is just like a coefficient. So it'd be like saying I have 3x there, but instead I have 3 cube roots of 3. So we're going to take this coefficient times this coefficient. Well, this coefficient here is just a 1. It's just we never write those down. So we're going to take 3 times 1 and get 3. I'm going to put my cube root symbol. And then I'm going to take 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've talked about this. This is a positive prism, so all numbers need to be positive because we're all happy here. So that negative is going to come to the outside, and it gets to do that, once again, gets to do that because this is an odd index number. And so long as this is an odd index number, the negative just gets to come right outside. All right, next problem. I am going to distribute. So I'm going to take this 3 square root of 3 times that square root of 2, and that's the square root of 6. And then I'm going to take this square root of 3 then, and I'm going to distribute it over to the square root of 6, and I'm going to get the square root of 18. You are now required to check both square roots or both radicals and make sure that there's nothing that I can group out. With 6, it's just a 2 times a 3, so this is just 2 and 3. Nothing can group, so that stays the square root of 6. 18 is 2 and 9, which is 3 and 3, and I can group those 3's, so this becomes 3 square root of 2. This is your answer. I cannot add those together. I absolutely cannot put those together because this is one kind, this is a 6 and this is a 2. Those are not like terms. You cannot put those together. So that would be your answer. It has 2 parts. All right, let's try another one. I have the square root of 10 times the square root of 2 for the square root of 20. I have the square root of 10 times a 5. Now this 5, once again, is like those coefficients. He can't go inside the radical. So he's going to be placed on the outside, because that basically says 5 times the square root of 10. And that's how you would write that. So 5 square root of 10, or 5 times the square root of 10, is how this part right here gets left. Well, I've got to look at 20. 20 is 4 and 5, and 2 and 2. And since I can group that group of 2's, the 2 comes out, the 1 meets its demise, leaves me a 5. Square root of 10 is 2 and 5. I can't group anything, so that just gets written as square root of 10. And that is your answer. Let's try one more. So negative 2 square root of 15 times 5. Well, 5 is an outside number. The negative 2 is an outside number. So we're going to multiply the outside numbers, and I get negative 10 square root of 15. I'm now going to take the negative 2, the square root of 15 times the square root of 10, and the negative 2 is just going to hang out on the outside, and 15 times 10 is 150. I look at my 15, that's 3 and 5. I can't do anything with that, so that's going to stay as negative 10 square root of 15. I'm going to take the 150, and I'm going to have 15 and 10, 3 and 5, 2 and 5. And hopefully you notice that I can group the 5's together. So the 1 5 is going to come out. Now I have a plus negative 2, so the 1 5 is going to come out and leave me with a 3 times a 2, or a 6 on the inside. We now need to multiply these together. So negative 10 square root of 15. I'm going to change this plus negative into a minus 10 square root of 6. And that is your final answer. Once again, I cannot combine them because they're radicands. The numbers inside the radicals are not the same. Now let's talk about FOIL. If you remember, when we see a 2 outside of a parenthesis, that means I have 2 of that same parenthesis. So I need to write that 2 times. All right, so now we're going to take the first term to the first term. So the square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is the square root of 15. I'm going to take the square root of 5 and do the last term over there, and so that's the square root of 5 times the square root of 2, or the square root of 10. I'm now going to take the square root of 2 times the square root of 5 and get the square root of 10. And I'm going to take the square root of 2 times the square root of 2, and I'm going to get the square root of 4. Well, the square root of 25 is 5. The square root of 4 is 2. And ladies and gentlemen, right here, those are like terms. They have the exact same number as the radicand. They have the exact same index number. So I'm talking about the square root of 10 and a square root of 10. So if I have one square root of 10 and I have another square root of 10, I have two square roots of 10. And then I'm going to go ahead and put my numbers here together. So this ends up being 7 plus 2 square root of 10. Let's do one more problem with FOIL. Now let's do this one. We're going to take the negative 3 square root of 5 times the square root of 5. And I'm going to get a negative 3 because that's on the outside number. So the outside to the outside gives me this negative 3. And the 5 times the 5 is going to be a 25. I'm going to take that same negative 3 square root of 5 to the square root of 3. And I'm going to end it with a negative 3 square root of 15. Square root of 3 times square root of 5 is square root of 15. And the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is the square root of 9. We're going to have several steps here. This becomes negative 3 times 5. I have negative 3 square root of 15. I have 1 square root of 15. So negative 3 plus a 1 is a negative 2, which we're going to write as a minus square root of 15. And then the square root of 9 is 3. Multiplying the negative 3 and the 5 together is a negative 15. Write all the rest of it down. Then I'm going to add the 3 to the negative 15. I'm going to take negative 12 minus 2 square root of 15. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so the homework assignment was the worksheet. Most of this unit, as I've said in the beginning, is going to be worksheets. So when you get back, if you were absent, you can pick up your worksheet. It will have your name on it, and it'll be in the bin. All right, have a good evening.